So this may sound egotistical, but I genuinely believe my analysis of the Marcus Rashford situation is one of the best around. Every time I hear an argument either pro Rashford or against Rashford, whilst I may agree with a lot, I think everyone misses a bigger picture. And so in this video I'm going to explain my whole theory. If you agree or even if you disagree but you like my reasoning, subscribe to the channel and let me know what other topics you want me to do videos on. So before I get into my theory, let me just lay out my opinion on Rashford. I don't think the guy has a mentality to be a world-class player at Manchester United, specifically at United. I'll come on to that in just a bit. He absolutely does my head in with the PR, like just give it a rest, perform on the pitch instead of giving interviews. The fact that he doesn't run around like Bruno or Anthony does my head in. Even though Anthony has been absolutely shit since joining United, the one redeeming quality he has is that he puts in a shift pretty much every game. Rashford just doesn't. Out of possession he plays like Mbappe, but in possession he doesn't play like Mbappe, which is a problem. If he was racing around and getting back into position and closing players down, I'm not joking, it would completely change the narrative around him. The fact he doesn't is what annoys me. I would probably look to sell him in the summer if we could get at least 70, maybe 80 million pounds for him, which I think is realistic, and also if we could get in a replacement who can replace his output. He also is not versatile at all, not just in terms of his position on the pitch, but also in terms of the system he's used in. He can't function in a Guardiola or Arteta side, because when the attack isn't being transitioned quickly, and he comes up against low, compact defensive units, where there isn't space in behind, he offers basically nothing other than finishing inside of the box. And so he's incredibly reliant on quick transitional attacks, where he can use his pace to run in behind. But I do think there is a situation where he could play in a possession dominant side, but I'll come on to which manager's system that would be in just a minute. And so all in all, I would look to sell Rashford this summer. However, most of the criticism I hear against Rashford misses the point completely. At the start of the video I said he won't be a world-class player at United. Now before I explain exactly what I mean by this, if you like me like to reminisce about the days when we had attackers like Rooney and Ronaldo, and prefer the retro jerseys to the current season ones, go over to Jersey FIFA. They've got all the Manchester United retro jerseys through the 90s and 2000s, as well as from other club and international sites as well. If you use code Atlantis you'll get a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which I will leave linked in the description. Now what I meant by this statement that he wouldn't be a world class player at United specifically is that if he were to make a move to Bayern or PSG, I think he actually goes to another level. Now why do I think this? Well, simply put, I think there are two main reasons why. At United he's just far too comfortable. He's the star of the team even if he isn't performing, just because of who he is and the fact that he's an academy graduate. And secondly, in the Premier League you need to perform week in week out. Rashford is just not that player. He needs to be able to coast. For PSG in Liga 1 or Bayern for most years in the Bundesliga, he would be able to coast, picking up goals without really hitting top form. And then because he's a purple patch player, when the Champions League comes around in February, March, April and May, if he can then hit form like he did in Ten Hag's first season, then he can legitimately become a world class player. The issue is United aren't in that situation. Manchester United need players who can perform week in week out in the Premier League. They don't have the luxury of waiting until the knockout stages of the Champions League. Marcus Rashford just doesn't have the consistency to be a world class player in the Premier League, but he has the talent to be a world class player in the Champions League, if that makes any sense. His talent is undeniable, he showed that last season. It's his mentality that is the problem, and that's what people who criticise Rashford miss. He can be a world class player, just not at Manchester United. And I actually think he'd be a very good replacement for either Kylian Mbappe or Leroy Sané. I think if he went to Bayern or PSG, he could coast for most of the season, still pick up a decent goal return without being the main man, and then his season just comes down to 2 or 3 months, 6 or 7 games in the Champions League, where he has shown before that he can be that clutch player that wins you games. But I just don't see him being able to do that in the Premier League at Manchester United. Let's look at the scenario where Rashford stays, which of course is a possibility, and I think there's one manager who could potentially get the best out of Rashford. That manager is Roberto De Zerbi. Now why do I think this? Well, it's because of something called the artificial counter-attack. See, Rashford's issue comes against compact defensive units, when he receives the ball to feet in the final third and there isn't the space in behind. However, on the counter-attack, Rashford can be lethal. Now many may think that this means he can only play in a counter-attacking side. However, this isn't the case. See, despite De Zerbi's Brighton being a possession dominant side, because of how De Zerbi structures the build-up phase, his attacks almost mimic a counter-attack. Brighton dropped their two centre-backs into the box, alongside the keeper, with the full-backs sitting relatively deep on the flanks, and a double pivot in the midfield, often sitting right on the edge of their own box. And the effect of this is that in order to man-to-man press Brighton, the opposition side have to commit both their front and midfield lines forward to the press. De Zerbi then instructs the front four, the wingers and the two centre forwards, to sit high, initially dragging the opposition's backline backwards towards a halfway line, which stretches the space between the opposition's defensive and midfield lines, meaning that when Brighton are able to play through the initial press in their defensive third, which they are very good at doing most of the time, they are able to exploit the space between the opposition's defensive and midfield lines, either by having one or both of the centre forwards dropping off into the space where the centre backs are reluctant to follow, from where they can turn and drive forward when they receive the ball, or through one of the midfield double pivot turning out of pressure and driving into the space, as Balbuena did multiple times in the game against Arsenal. And so with De Zerbi as manager, this would give United the ability to progress the ball forward with a quick transition, benefiting the likes of Garnacho, Rashford, Højlund and Bruno Fernandes, but still allow us to sustain control of the game through possession, rather than playing like an NBA side going up one end and then allowing the opposition to do the same. In terms of style, De Zerbi is like Canelo, calculated, precise and systematic. Ten Hag is like Deontay Wilder, a dangerous knockout blow in certain situations, but always leaving themselves far too open for a knockout blow themselves. And to be honest, Wilder's knockout is far more devastating than Ten Hag's United. Under De Zerbi, I could see Rashford getting back to the level he was at in 22-23, a 30 goal a season forward, but I could also see him maintaining his current form. If he was 22 or 23, I'd take the chance, but in my opinion, whilst a Rashford-De Zerbi combination is exciting, I just don't have a whole lot of confidence in Rashford to regain his previous level after this season. And given that he's only going to decline in value as he comes into his late 20s, alongside his massive wage package of around £15 million a season, I think if United can get around £70 million up front, with another 15 to maybe £20 million in add-ons, then I'd probably just do that deal. But if United aren't going to be able to get that sort of fee for Rashford, and that could be possible if Bayern decide to keep Leroy Sané, PSG decide to continue their policy of signing younger players, and no other clubs come in for him, I'd probably just keep him for another season and see what De Zerbi can do with him. Because I do think if there is a manager that can get Rashford back to his best, it is the Italian. If United are going to replace Rashford, it has to be someone that can come in and fill the output that he produced last season almost immediately. Because the likes of Garnacho and Ahmad and even Højlund as well aren't realistically at that stage where you can expect them to fill that output. Now there are a few big names such as Rafael Leao and Kvaratskhelia who would probably be the obvious marquee options. But in another video I'm going to break down who I would replace Rashford with, and it's someone who I think would be even better than Michael Olise. If you do want more content, I'll leave some of my other videos linked in the description and comment section as well. But if you do want some exclusive content, you can check out my unreleased videos as well as my Patreon podcast episodes. You can get a 7-day free trial. I will leave a link in the description below. But let me know your thoughts on Rashford. Would you keep him? Would you sell him? Who are you going to replace him with?